KREIDLERNING is the first of the 4 books that served as the foundation of Confucianism in the Song dynasty. It takes up numerous topics from Chinese philosophy and political thought and combines them in a unique way. And in new music, the title is familiar from Cornelius Cardius' piece of the same name. In the following, I want to present and link some of the themes of my work. Not chronologically, I draw lines between some points, sound waves, so to speak. There is no sound in the first 4 of the 8-minute piece for harp and video. After the definition of music was dissolved as tonal in the early modern era, 100 years later it was also dissolved as medial. Everything is conceptual media art that sometimes uses this medium, sometimes that. Seen this way, I can describe my profession, my expertise. I am familiar with instruments, with timing, and can write down rhythms precisely. Here, behind the harp strings, there is a monitor showing a pre-produced video. This video is transmitted to a large screen above the player, or here left to him, to her, with a camera that films through the strings as the player stretches and tilts the strings and then later plucks them. This results in patterns, windows open and close, and the semantics of perceiving through a grid establishes itself. I refer to this composition approach as media art with music. Music is the epitome of the cultural, technological, and political disposition of sound. Like in this example, based on the structure of the instrument, which has vertical strings in its frame that you can see through. All actions are precisely notated as a score and are therefore a rhythmically and musically heard setting, even if the actual sound is only heard in the second part of the piece. First, a specific musicality is transposed into the visual, theatricalized, so to speak, which is connected to the musical aura of the harp before it is brought together with something that actually sounds. The harp is interpreted here in its permeability to other media, and yet it always remains in the foreground. However, one can direct one's perception to the spaces in between. The audibility raises the question of what lies behind. Harper in Old French means to grab, or think of the harpoon, and it remains for the audience to decide which side of the bars they are actually on, in the cell or in freedom. On the contrary, my orchestral piece TT1, premiered at Donaueschingen Musiktage 2015, is a very abstract piece about micro-rhythms and micro-intervals, about the perception of different curve progressions on different parameters and their combinations. I played a lot of computer games when I was young. And later, sometimes I thought, oh, if I only had practiced the piano more instead. Today, I think, oh, if I only had played more computer games instead of practicing the piano, that is, learn algorithms. Against applause. I am against applause. My ideal is, roughly, that one is fascinated and repelled, attracted and irritated by the work of art, and I don't know how to express that in applause. Just as it has become almost embarrassing when someone applauds after landing with a plane today, in 20 years people will no longer clap in concerts or in the theater. With each cello piece, the cello is used up a little more, and with each composition, the composer is used up a little further. In none of my artistic works do I examine anything or investigate a question. Schlimmer als die Wichtigtuer sind die Unwichtigtuer. A concept piece doesn't have to be listened to in its entirety. Nietzsche says, basically a few bars are enough for me. I do not have a great artistic vision. I am driven by my ideas. I can't plan far ahead. Anyone who listens to a piece of music again probably didn't listen carefully the first time. Once more, the harp piece. Later, the spatial grid is joined by the temporal one, the shutter frequency, the basic rhythm of the camera, so to speak. Images the vibrating strings with 25 individual shots per second, which means characteristic wave movements can be seen. The strings appear to vibrate forward, backward, or even standing. With this in mind, in Selbstauslöser, a musical theater, this physical aspect of music is theatricalized. A low double bass string vibrates and I join in the sound. The whole scene lasts 15 minutes and there are constant puns made on the similarity in German of Ton, Tone and Tod, Death.
Das Denken in der Zeit verstärkt den Ton. Die Tongeweihten grüßen dich. Freiheit oder Ton. Ich kann nämlich auf den Ton nicht ausstehen. Ihr neuen tonschicken Outfits. Sowieso. Gott ist Ton. Wir haben ihn vertont. Der Bogen als Fragebogen an der Seite. Wir wollen die Seite mit dem Bogen der Sprache streichen. Verachte nicht den Ton, sondern befreunde dich mit ihm. Die Lektüre der Seite mündet in das Ereignis des Tons. Wenn du das Leben aushalten willst, richte dich auf den Ton ein. Der Ton ihn belebt, dann Ton. Diana Jones und der Tempel des Tons. Diesen Sprungcharakter des Tons gilt es wahrzunehmen. Schlag den Ton. Da wird ja zu Ton erschrocken. Der Ton ist ein Meister aus Deutschland. Wir sind zum Ton verurteilt. Wir schreiten dem Ton entgegen. Der Ton steht vor der Tür. Die Liebe überwindet den Ton. So wissen wir das Dasein eine Lust. Der Ton erwünscht, das Leben wir verhasst. Doch ist nie der Ton ein ganz willkommener Gast. Komm, süßer Ton, schlaf es, Bruder. Ton, wo ist sein Stachel? Ihr Athener, ich bin furchtlos gegen den Ton. Lasst uns aber auch so erwägen, wie viel Ursache wir haben zu hoffen, es sei etwas Gutes. Denn eins von beiden ist es Tonsein. Entweder so viel als nichts sein, noch irgendeine Empfindung von irgendetwas haben, wenn man Ton ist. Oder, wie auch gesagt wird, es ist eine Versetzung und Umzug der Seele von hinnen an einen anderen Ort. Also müsst auch ihr, Richter, gute Hoffnung haben in Absicht des Tones. Und dies eine Richtige im Gemüt halten, dass es für den guten Mann kein Übel gibt. im Reich des Tones. Ich habe den Ton verdient, ging Sokrates freiwillig in den Ton. Ja, er lachte sich zu Tone. Ist das etwa der Ton?
The sound wave as an aesthetic object, physics and expressionistic. Music and sound are a reference point of my work, but which also uses all kinds of other media, image, sculpture, installation, video and performance. In recent years, the focus has turned partially to visual work. My works are, or these works are, visual synthesizers, so to speak, that open up and expand the richness of sound waves, their formal possibilities, as well as their symbolic nature. The sound wave in the picture as a sound progression taken from time, but also as a genuinely aesthetic structure. Each wave is carefully selected in its shape as well as in its latent sounding reference. So using lots of procedures, I speak, sing, play and shout sounds, edit them electronically or collect them from my palette from the world's sound archives. And in the mixture of working with a microphone in the studio, the arrangement on the computer, and further addition, sometimes with brush and paint, gravity and chemical processes, there are, so to speak, image concerts. Do we only see when we see? Of course, we think along, the brain reads, classifies and references, it reacts. Conceptual art opened up the realm of the non-retinal, the processing of perceptions or simply ideas that has been turned away from the sense of sight. In my latest works, one could speak conversely of the plus cochlear, the subcutaneously added hearing organ in the case of retinal and ideal stimuli. The ear listens while viewing. The stimulus is visual, the information is acoustic. Since 2021, I deepened my occupation with sound visuality to sound waves as aesthetic objects. This also is related to the idea of physics aesthetics and imperatives like follow the science, which in times of corona and climate change may be other paradigms than postmodern intertextuality. But also the exhibition and installation format, something I haven't done at all up to recently, sparks my interest more and more. It is both an activation and empowerment of the audience. Since Corona, we have been trained in reading wave curves, following their drama and discussing their forecasts. In the artwork, they become the drama of seeing and hearing par excellence. The tension curve is an existential moment, a seismic notation in microscopic proximity, and a temporal totality. The rash of vocal cords, the performance of neurology is shown here as a stream archived for exhibition, artistically placed between physics, code, and aesthetics. The image literally holds its breath. Fortunately, air is invisible. If all the waves that constantly pulsate in it were to appear in the field of vision, you would drown in this sea of atmospheres. But I dare to make that sound visible as an amplitude curve, as we know it, stylized from icons for podcasts, for example, also as a radial wave or as a sheet music. But there is always a leap in the autonomy of the pictorial, so that even portraits, so to speak, sounding images, become possible with the material or the course of time crosses over. going on with a bolero.
Das ist gerne. Kopf. Ja, sich deshalb. Und so für das überall. Ich war brauch verloren. Verlangt bleiben nimmer. Ärgerlich. Ist gelangt. Ich und dicht kein Verhältnis ist Rick. Das ist echt Berlin. Alte aus Raum. Übersetzung ich glauben will. Diese Öckli. Der Forbes. Ja, Kugel. Aber mit das Speziell. Gerne. Das Zimmer der Komm. Auf. Krieg und Kauf. Er mit dem Erlass. Mit darin Paar. Nicht erfüllt. Und alles der Angriff zwischen das Haus. Angriff. Du uns jodlichen. Da war ich allein. Was ich Stein nicht zu. In Ordnung. Steinformation. Stadtrand. Mein Fürst. Punk. Kleiner Steinsdorf. Schwansdorf. Feind ab. Mein Führer. Steiner. Und im Ostenberg. Kräfte breit auf. Was hier? Ich genüge. Im Sigmar. Lassen, dass sie ja noch habe. Oh, und bis am Nord. Und bis zu Angriffen. Ist der Fall. Ich verliert jetzt die Front. Da sagen von Nord. Die Soldaten. Das ist nicht. Er konnte nicht. Die für dem Feind aufgelungen Linie. Sie verblättigt, wer ist ungeheim nachgeübt. Sie ist weg, das Süden hat was war das? Anstalt von dem ist mit ihrem angeleitet Gegner zu habe das Militär alle ich will auf beide der war will da nur ich habe die Partei
Ravel's Bolero, the concept of the constant increase in volume, occupied me for a long time. This is also a metaphor, a concept. And by the way, when I was as a student in Darmstadt for the first time in 2004, no one spoke of concept music. This term simply didn't exist back then. Conceptual listening. We hear Beethoven as Beethoven. We hear a largo as a largo. A piano sounds beautiful, and it also sounds like a piano. We listen to music as music. We don't listen to music as non-music. We don't hear Beethoven as not Beethoven. A gray picture is not just gray, it exemplifies grayness. And here we hear the bolero, and in this case the minus bolero Ravel's Bolero without the melody. Yeah, you know, it got a bit difficult with melodies in new music today. No? The term avant-garde may no longer be in vogue, but I do think you should create something new somehow. And there are no role models for the minor bolero, no previous music pieces like that. Well, okay, there is at the beginning of the Well-Tempered Clavier, Bach placed the concept piece Minus Ave Maria. This piece is, and I didn't intended it, I first of all just was interested to hear this accompaniment, which also makes that crescendo. But then in the first and only rehearsal, I think everyone realized that here the structure of the orchestra is reversed. Usually in tonal music, in of course orchestra music, and especially at the bolero, the melody is always played by the first violins, first flute, first trombone, etc. And the accompaniment is played by the second violins, the second flute, and so on. And this is here put upside down, so this, as said, reverses the structure, the hierarchy, the politics of the orchestra. The minus is the minus not of subtraction, but of negation. Now going back a bit in the year 2008, but staying political, in those days I said, anyone who writes for the violin is copying.
Am 12. September 2008 ist es soweit. Kreidler fährt mit einem Lastwagen voller Papier bei der GEMA-Generaldirektion in Berlin am Wittenbergplatz vor. Etwa 50 Personen erwarten ihn vor dem Gebäude. Journalisten von Zeitungen und Blogs, Radio und Fernsehen, Musiker, Creative-Commons-Aktivisten und Politiker der Grünen sowie der Piratenpartei.
Musik ist keine Kunst mehr. Musik ist eine juristische Fachdisziplin. Aber ich mache aus dem Juristischen wieder Kunst. Das ist ein Musiktheaterstück. Das ist der erste Akt. Sie erleben die Aufführung einer von 500.000 Werkanmeldungen, die jährlich bei der GEMA eingehen. Wird dieses Stück legal sein oder illegal? Wird es vielleicht das illegalste Musikstück der Musikgeschichte sein? Darauf dürfen wir jetzt gespannt sein. Es muss natürlich im digitalen Zeitalter eine neue Möglichkeit gefunden werden, für die Verbreitung einerseits und für die Vergütung andererseits. Ich begrüße Sie von der GEMA. Ich bin selbst Mitglied von der GEMA, das möchte ich sehr betonen. Ich wünsche mir sehr als Partner der GEMA, dass wir in diesen Zeiten Möglichkeiten finden, dass Künstler ihre Kunst verbreiten können, dass sie dafür vergütet werden. Und ich hoffe, wir kommen dann ins Gespräch.
Es ist Herbst und ich möchte einen schönen Pflaumenkuchen backen. Wenn ich aber bei Nacht und Nebel in den Garten steige und die Pflaumen einfach wegnehme, oder wenn ich, das scheint mir so ein bisschen die Zielrichtung zu sagen, zu sein.
Nicht geistiges Eigentum ist materielles Eigentum.
Geistiges Eigentum ist wie materielles Eigentum.
Es geht doch nicht um Pflaumen, sondern um ein Pflaumenkuchenrezept.
Es geht um den konkreten Pflaumenkuchen.
Weil die Pflaumen müssen kopiert werden.
Pflaumen für alle.
Also den möchte ich sehen, der Pflaumen kopiert.
So, what was here? I had composed a short 33-second piece of electronic music, but that contains 70,200 foreign parts, samples. And the copyright of this piece is totally unclear. I had to register it at the GEMA, and at least in those days, but still in paper. And there is a small field where you can enter here is any foreign parts used. So I had to fill out 70,200 registration forms for this short piece. And until now, it is totally unclear the copyright status of that piece. And I mention this since this is this sculpture here, this number 70,000, is arbitrary. It is symbolic for the whole archive, which is available digitally. And exactly the same discussion now raised again with AI, that AI is also using the entire archive, and from mini snips, then always making new works, so to speak, but who do they belong to? Who is the author? Who has responsibility for that? So this is an inherent discussion, the use of big data in digitalization in 21st century, maybe generally. Artists are, of course, interested in money. Me too. Money is useful and philosophically very interesting. For example, how does it affect our hearing if we get paid for listening? I discussed this in Ear Jobs. People were invited to listen to pieces from a given playlist and get money for it, with one addition. All these pieces were mostly new music pieces, on the one hand classics like Cage 433, or contemporary ones, also including a piece of mine. And each piece was around 5 minutes and was paid around €1. But then there was also one Muzak title, which was paid 10 times more, €10.
But what's the company do?
No, I'm producing listening.
Producing listening for what?
Makes the world better.
So I'm also a non-materialist.
Uh-huh.
And I would not listen to this Muzak only out of mercenary reasons.
Yeah.
I would listen to it out of enjoyment.
Yeah. Okay, but here it's no enjoyment. Here it's work. You have to take the money then if you listen to it.
I mean, why don't you just take the money?
When you refer to a job, that's painful.
Yeah.
Right, and you're saying do it the easy way.
No, not necessarily.
Yeah, well, I agree with you.
But you don't have to suffer. You don't have to make yourself suffer. That's it's been 500 years of that shit. Like Protestantism and stuff.
And he thinks I'm stupid because I like music.
Yes,
but I think that says more about you than you.
He's a fascist. There's a value for each.
Yes.
And this is what confused me, because if it's work to listen, it seems to me that they should each be the same value.
No,
otherwise, you're making a judgment on which one.
Yes, that's
but
part
why?
of the...
Why make a judgment?
Yeah, but we're in capitalism, when things are paid.
Well,
I mean, there's a gender pay gap, for instance.
I sometimes feel the need to make political art. That's why I make it. It doesn't have to have political influence or relevance. I primarily want to express something. Its effects cannot be foreseen or measured. Anyway, good political art is difficult. I would say it's the supreme discipline. Very few of my pieces are political. In 2009, I received a commission from the festival Klangwerkstatt Berlin to make a new piece for a given instrumentation, for a given ensemble. But then I did not compose a piece. Instead, I looked for a composer who could make that piece for me. And especially, you find also on platform, there are available platforms for songwriters. Or in this case, I found in China a composer who writes contract compositions, so to speak. So I gave him pieces of mine from years before and asked him to make now a new piece in that style of my pieces, now for this new commission, for this instrumentation. As well as I also looked for a programmer, and I found an Indian programmer whom I gave the same pieces and asked him to derive from these pieces a software which would then also be able to generate this style and then produce a new piece for the given commission. And since these two are from cheap wages countries, China and India. It was pretty cheap for me to buy this course. It only cost me altogether around $150, whereas I at least received 1,500 euros. So there's two aspects in the piece. One is the question of authorship. Who did then compose this piece actually? Somehow it sounded like our music, and on the other hand it did not, since these are composers, or the other one is more a sound technician or programmer, certainly coming from other cultures. And it's certainly a kind of exploitation or showing a system of inequality. And then it was premiered, and every time the piece is played, I played it quite often, you just cannot play the piece and don't say anything, or only in the program note write, oh, by the way, the piece was written by composers from China and India. So now I have to make a moderation then to tell people the conceptual background. And let's take a look here in the premiere in Berlin back in 2009.
Jetzt gibt es noch andere Möglichkeiten, Plagiate zu machen. Ich wollte das auch nicht nur von Hand, sondern auch maschinell was erstellen, also mit künstlicher Intelligenz. Und habe eine Ausschreibung gemacht in Indien für einen billigen Programmierer. Da hat mir das Auswärtige Amt geholfen und habe also gewissermaßen einen kleinen Kompositionswettbewerb da ausgerichtet, weil es musste ein Programmierer sein, der auch mit Musik vertraut ist. Und da habe ich dann den Programmierer Ramesh Murabai ausgewählt, der hervorragende Referenzen hat. Dieselben Stücke, die Chang bekommen hat, habe ich auch Murabai gegeben, und er hat daraus aus den Daten ein Programm gemacht. Das hat mich nur $15 gekostet. Übrigens bekomme ich von der GEMA 1.500 Euro dafür. Murabai hat mir ausgerechnet, dass meine Musik klanglich zu 25% aus Samples besteht, davon ca. 70% Popmusik, 20% Sprache und 10% Klassik. Insgesamt also 25% anteilig Samples und 75% Instrumentalklänge. Davon 53% Punktualismus und 23%. Der Rest ist undefinierbar. Mittlere Lautstärken machen ca. 46% aus, laute Stelle 39% und leise 15%. Es gibt mindestens 30 verschiedene Klangfarben. Und jedes Stück hat im Schnitt aber noch ca. 35% Eigenständigkeit, was dann ein Zufallsgenerator halt machen muss. Und ein solches Stück hat er jetzt also aus den gegebenen Daten generieren lassen. Ja, das ist Globalisierung. Also das Keyboard, das hier steht, ist ja auch aus China und wird hier auch teuer verkauft. Oder Klamotten sind ja, also die Klamotten, die ich anhabe, sind wahrscheinlich auch aus Billiglohnländern und hier teuer verkauft. Das ist halt das System. Also da regt sich auch keiner auf. Doch, das ist meine Musik. Das habe ich gekauft und das ist juristisch, das ist meine Musik. Also die Verwertungsrechte, die liegen bei mir und ich kann das ja einkaufen. Also natürlich gehört in Wirklichkeit niemand ein Kunstwerk, bin ich der Ansicht. Das gehört auch nicht den Komponisten aus Asien, sondern es sind auch Spieler, die daran beteiligt sind und Instrumente, die von Instrumentenbauern gebaut wurden. Und da steckt ja Technologie von Hunderten von Jahren drin und in jeder Partitur steckt Know-how von Hunderten von Jahren drin. Also ich finde es völlig falsch, da überhaupt davon zu sprechen, dass es Eigentumsrechte da gibt bei Kunst.
We can later discuss that. Another political work that I can now link to previously shown works that are about sound and visualization is here the sonification of diagrams. This happens in charts music, a piece I made back in 2009 at the height of the financial crisis at the time. Stock prices plummeted around the world, and just then a children's composition software from Microsoft called Songsmith was released. Then I sonified the data from the stock market crisis as melodies and arranged them with this, so to speak, children's toy. rumba. Or a waltz. When I use the software of Microsoft, of course, also I will make the Microsoft charts sound. Bum, 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 bum. Or music industry. And now here's an intermezzo. Yeah, I'm showing the function of music in society, that music is used to relax or to dance. So this is a recording from a prison, yeah. Or casting shows was in those days very popular, or the bourgeois concert hall. And now comes the counterpoint. Or German weapon company also going on. Yeah, and also found this chart on the internet. Here I have string chord as an arrangement. For the USA, I took country music as a style, yeah, US country music. And here's the finale. I did not compose the piece. The piece was composed by them. I only arranged it. Yeah, so meanwhile also, so this was a YouTube video, and I said you cannot play this in radio, but it was played in radio, so that's not my piece. Meanwhile, there's also instrumental versions, and maybe one day they will be in Carnegie Hall, orchestra, choir, soloists. Okay, my only hit was seen on YouTube more than 500,000 times. Take the piece more symbolically, it represents Marx's still absolutely valid observation that capitalism produces and lives from periodic crisis. The next piece here is a bit unclear as to whether it is a sonification of visuals or whether the visual comes from sound. It happens simultaneously. hands performing actions on a mixer, which the clarinet produces synchronously but live. As a further element, not only does the hand move the mixer, but the mixer itself moves under the hand. The foreground and background counterpoint and add to each other. The combination of instrument and video makes it possible to assign sound actions to do different levels using the visual information. A sound connection can belong to the foreground or the background movement in the image. But the split is twofold. Not only are the sounds distributed across the foreground and background of the video, but the difference between sound and image becomes an issue precisely in the simultaneity of the events. All of this is carried out based on aspects of music productions or the mixing desk or the performance situation. Later, bowing is also a part of the performance, or then more abstractly that just a square notation is used. Just as the sound material calls up typical clarinet techniques like flutter tongue and bisbillando here, and creates an abstract tone set with quarter and even 8 tones. And these binarities are again projected into the two-movement nature of the whole video. So that was the first of the two pieces for clarinet and video. And once again, the visualization of music as an art practice in its own right. The reduction to the motive, to elementary geometric forms such as circle and rectangle, these were visual strategies that changed the way of seeing in the 20th century from cubism to logo design. But what if those basic signs have an own aesthetic sphere, the notes of music? In 2013, I started to recognize the polyaesthetics of musical notation and developed it into a visual language of its own. All of a sudden, I no longer just read notes, but also saw them. And I saw them twice, once as symbols of music, but at the same time as independent pictorial building blocks. That's the coronavirus as its core. With sheet music, I can not only write down music, but also represent objects, events, words, and thoughts. So these pieces are images at the wall. They're not supposed to be played. Well, some people already did. They are images, they are imaginary music only heard in your head. And I would say that this constellation of aesthetics, optically, linguistically, and musically, draws the viewer through minimalist concentration, but also provide hopefully some wit and immediate beauty. Again, capturing music as an image concerns me, and it's also a philosophical question about time, about the present, the moment, and then the past, capturing, fixing, saving, and viewing again. As already mentioned in the beginning, having worked on an extended or even dissolved definition of music, it is consistent to use video. It comprises all media of music, and I would also say it's a successor of tape music, but more appealing. That's the opening scene of my film 3, a film about nakedness and music and sound. And as you could see here, another aspect, these large quantities, like 70,200 samples, or here lots of video material, how to handle this aesthetically. One possible technique is the split screen technique, which I used pretty often. Now, as a last work to show here, I'd like to show the piece called Study for Piano, Audio and Video Playback. It's only 5 minutes long, but which comprises, I guess, of a lot of what I've previously spoken about. It's in the first half, it's, so to speak, only music, lots of algorithmically procedures, and then the second part becomes more multimedia with video addition, then becoming more conceptual and performative. My first name is Johannes. Luckily, my parents were unimaginative enough not to add another first name. The last name Kreidler comes from the profession of forest uprooting. I'm the fourth and youngest child of teachers, born in the first month of the 1980s. Grew up in a suburb of Stuttgart, southwest Germany. This was a Catholic, politically conservative milieu. The parents had achieved social advancement. Grandfathers were a farmer and a small town hall official with many children. And this was passed on to the offspring the social advancement should continue, so the upbringing was very strict. I started composing at the age of 9 after I threw away the recorder and suddenly had a passion for playing the piano. From 2000 onwards, I studied composition in Freiburg with the Marxist Matthias Sparlinger, as well as music theory and electronic music in The Hague. I then moved to Berlin and was able to make a reputation in new music relatively early on in my late 20s. At 39, I became a professor for composition at the Basel Music Academy. Politically, I am pro-accelerationism and against identity, religion, culture industry, marriage. I love 2 women with whom I am in open relationships. I don't think there is free will. We move between biological and anthropological determinism and quantum physical random chaos. Art is, as Nietzsche says, the ultimate metaphysical activity of man. In addition to love, the sublime of nature, and the fascination of thought, art for me is the reason to affirm life. Thank you.